Randy K. here. We all go through struggles at times, and I want to share with you through stories and insights and interviews with others how much God loves you. He loves you immensely, and that's what I hope you will hear through our interviews and what we have to share with you. Thanks for staying tuned. Here we go. Welcome to this episode of Revelations from Heaven. My guest today, duo, is Martin and Beth Edmonds. They come to us from San Antonio, Texas. And Martin suffered from what he thought was kidney stones, went into the hospital. It was an emergency. Found out after a while that he had a ruptured aorta. That was a crisis that led to a near-death experience that brought him into the light of Jesus, into heaven. He'll be telling us about this amazing story, and we'll also be hearing from Beth as she went through this horrific, what turned from a horrific period to one of the greatest moment in Martin's life, certainly. So, Martin and Beth, it is great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Randy. We really appreciate the opportunity to get our testimony out.
Thank you.
Well, here you are now, having been in perfect health. No one's, I guess, in perfect health, but you were in great health. And you had had kidney stones previously, or you knew what kidney stones were about at least. So you went in for that. You were given what amounts to a blood thinner, Lovenox, which probably was one of the worst things they could have given it to you, because what happened eventually was something that was even more traumatic and life-threatening than that. So take us back, if you will, to that point that led up to you going into the hospital and the crisis that led to you going to heaven.
So went in, started off Sunday morning, and I had urine in my blood. So I thought, well, I'd stay home from church because we sing in the choir, and you have to get up early in the morning to be there. So we decided to stay home, just kind of ride it out, because I hadn't had any pain. I know with my previous kidney stone, there was a tremendous amount of pain involved. There was no pain with this, so I just figured, hey, I was just going to pass it, and it's going to be good as gold. So about 1 o'clock or so, 12 or 1 o'clock, pain finally hit in my left side. And I asked Beth to take me to the hospital because I figured what was coming. So we got to the hospital, and you can step in and correct me, because there's a lot that happened just in a short span of time. So got to the hospital. They ended up doing a scan, and the doctor came out and he says, you know, we got bad news. You know, you don't have a stone. And I was like, well, it's got to be a stone. I mean, I know what a stone feels like. And he's like, you've got cancer. You got kidney cancer on your left kidney, or you got a mass. He said the mass. So, and the poor doctor, he acted like he was just scared stiff just to even talk to me, because I guess he didn't know what to expect from me. And I just told him, I said, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? And they admitted me, and they went ahead and was going to do another scan, but this time they had to do contrast because they had seen some bleeding, internally. Go ahead.
That was later.
Oh, that was later?
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So
you were in the midst of the crisis, and probably Beth has a more cogent memory of some of these things, because you're struggling for your life at this point. I mean, you thought you were, well, I guess we're preceding that point at which something even more life-threatening was happening to you.
Yeah, so they ended up doing the scan, and they had given me, like you said, they had previously given me a Lovenox shot because I was in the hospital bed, not moving around. So they was afraid of possible blood clots forming. So after they gave me the shot, they gave me the scan with the contrast. I went back to the room, and just within a few minutes, the pain went from my left side to my right side, and it went like really fast. The first thing I noticed, I broke out in a cold sweat, and then the pain hit. And I never thought that there was more pain been a kidney stone, because my other kidney stone was like a 7.5 millimeter, which is pretty good size. But this pain, this even topped it. And I just started praying to Jesus. Beth went out, she got the nurse. The nurse came in, and I told the nurse, I said, I don't know what's wrong, but there's something bad wrong. And the nurse immediately said, you're hemorrhaging. And she ran out of the room and brought in a crash team. And I'm going to guess the crash team had 10, maybe 12 people in it. And by that time, of course, I'm still kind of bunched over in pain. They're wrapping wires around me, putting sensors hanging off my ear. I mean, there's wires everywhere. And I can hear Beth. I can hear all of the crowd of people around me. I could hear them talking. I could make out what they were saying. They were trying to talk to me to make sure I was okay, still coherent. And I was responding to them. But then is when, I noticed, I looked up at the ceiling, and previously I'd obviously been looking at the ceiling because I was in bed. I noticed that there was, because I was all set in the room. Normally in the room, you've got one main fluorescent light, and then scattered around the room, you have what they call recessed can lighting in the room. And those can lightings had chrome rings around the outer part of the light. So while they were working on me, I looked up and I noticed that, when you look up at a ceiling, apart from where the actual light is, the ceiling is dark. It gets darker until you get to, another light source. Well, everything in between the lights just started lighting up. I mean, it just started, it was like the light was coming. I don't know to say if it was coming through the ceiling or it was, it was almost like I was looking through the ceiling. I don't know how else to describe it. So I started to see it starting to, get brighter and brighter. And I noticed that, of course, I'm trying to think of how to put this in chronological order. So I noticed that there was a peace that came over me, and peace just doesn't describe it. And it's really difficult to describe something that nobody else has seen other than, other people that have had near-death experiences. This peace was more, on earth here, we think of peace as, away from evil, getting our thoughts, our head, guarding our mind. But that wasn't it. It was like evil did not exist there. It just wasn't there. You didn't have to guard your mind from thoughts or anything. It was what I would call a true and total rest. The next thing I noticed was I'm mechanically inclined. Like I'm an engineer, so I like experimenting. And the cool thing was, one thing I noticed was, as I seemed to be passing on, my mind started working faster and faster and faster. And they had me on Dilaudid, and I'm not even sure what other drugs they had me on. But I was thinking clearer than I ever have in my life. And I was looking at the light, and then I would turn and look at the mass of people around me and pay attention to Beth, because I could hear her, tell me to stay with her. She told me she loved me. And when I would go from paying attention to that back to the light, I would notice that those sounds would start to echo of the people talking in the room. And then it went from an echo to almost like a Charlie Brown type teacher. Wah, wah, wah. You absolutely could not understand what they were saying. It was just all muddled. But then if I took my focus off of the light and looked back to them, the exact reverse happened. You'd hear the wah, 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 and then the echoes would come in, and then the voices would start to clear up again. And I did that several times because it just fascinated me. I was like, wow, But then eventually the light got bright enough to where I didn't want to look away. It hit me that that's where I belong. And I don't know how to describe it other than and it did actually hit me that I had met my goal. And really the thing was, what popped in my head, it wasn't a question as such, like, am I dying? And it wasn't that. I actually was speaking, like I was telling you before, I was talking to Jesus this whole, during this whole time, praying to him, asking him to take, help me with the pain. And I just said out loud, I'm dying. And when I said that, it was just like, I've never had so much energy in my life. I know there's some people that describe it like being maybe like a 16-year-old or, much, much younger with so much energy. But I'm telling you that what I experienced, I don't know that the human body could take. It was that much excitement. Go ahead.
When you said I'm dying, Beth, was this something that you heard Martin say, or was this something that was kind of internal to your inner voice, whatever?
I couldn't hear him at that point. The last thing that I heard him say was that he saw white. He couldn't see anything. All he saw was white. And that's when I told him that I loved him and to stay with me. But as time went by, he became what looked to me was more and more lifeless. And he was completely gray, and I could see his lips moving at some points, but what I saw was him looking like he was becoming lifeless.
Did you reach a point, Beth, where you thought that he had died?
I knew that it was critical. I didn't hear the nurse tell him that he was hemorrhaging, but they had told us that the scan showed that there was internal bleeding. They needed to find out where it was coming from. And when he doubled over in pain and when he became so pale, I just knew. I knew what that meant. And as time went by, gray isn't accurate. He was almost a light greenish gray, and it was absolutely horrible. I have had to process a lot from that, from what happened to him. But the entire time I was praying, and just the stream of consciousness, I guess, a continued prayer that God would save him. And at one point, I heard the nurses say that his blood pressure was 50 over 32. And a few minutes later, one of the nurses told another nurse that we don't have a surgeon on duty. And they both just froze for a minute. And I kept praying. And all I could say was, Lord, if you will preserve his life, it's nothing less than a miracle. We will give you all the glory. But you're the only one that can preserve his life right now.
Well, it sounds like a miracle was on its way, because Martin, you were in the space, you had this enough awareness of what was going on that you believed you were dying, but it doesn't sound like a fearful awareness of dying. It sounded like you were going someplace that was better than before. So tell us about that as we pick up the story now, when you're kind of the light is, you're immersed in the light, and you know that you're dying.
So when I said that, like I said, I was ecstatic. I was so excited. It's just unbelievable how much excitement, because all kinds of thoughts started going through my head. My goal has been met. I'm going home. And when you look into the light, it's like you belong there. You know that's where you should be, and that's where you want to go. Your whole mindset, it's a whole different mindset when you're in that state, or when you're I guess getting ready to leave your body. So I know, like, when we're back here and something happens in our life, and we talk back and forth between our loved ones, and you try to figure out what happened, and some things you just have to come up to the conclusion that it was just God's will. But when you're in that state, when you're, I don't know what you call it, when you're dead or dying, it's like that is inside of you. It's not anything that you have to talk about or try to convince yourself of, or think about. It's there. You already know that. It's like implanted in you. So
That was, well, you're talking about two diametrically opposed things. You're talking about dying, being in the midst of a crisis. Now, you were eventually, it was diagnosed that you had a ruptured artery,
Yes,
correct?
sir. Mhm.
So it wasn't kidney stones. This is a
No,
rupture.
yeah. The original pain was actually kidney cancer. They found a mass on my left kidney, and that's what they were thinking that they were addressing. I don't know if they initially thought that the blood may have been coming from that tumor or what, but they just told us that they had seen blood, so they needed to do another scan. As far as why it blew out, the doctors have no clue of why that on the other side totally ruptured. They have no idea. They just told me that when it ruptured, it had to they believed that there was an aneurysm on the side of the artery, and it had swollen up to about a 2 to 2.5 inch diameter before it popped. And when it popped, that's when all my blood supply had went out into my stomach. Um, I know that
Mm.
when they finally did take me to surgery, and that was another miracle because they didn't take me to surgery until after probably about an hour and 5 minutes after it ruptured.
Wow.
So I'm bleeding out all that time.
Wow.
So I mean, that's the miracle right there because the hole was big enough. I've never seen what they used to plug the hole with. They called it a coil. And they were saying that they had to use two coils to plug the hole, and they weren't even sure that that was going to do it. And they had told me that if that did not do it, then they would have to call in a specialist. And there was only like 2 or 3 specialists in the United States that actually handled that type of surgery. And that if they would have had to call them in, that most likely I would not have survived because one thing at the time it would take to get him there. And the other thing would be I would be so weak that they don't think that I would be able to survive the actual surgery. So
Yeah.
it did plug up. It did end up plugging up. So obviously I'm here. So
Yeah, I had worked at one point with some uh, uh, vascular surgeon and cardiovascular surgeon, and where you live there. But that when you say over an hour to get you into surgery, a major rupture like yours is a matter of seconds or minutes at most before death. So this was a miracle that they were able to get you to surgery. So when you were through this, was there any cogency or awareness on your part as to where you were, or were you in this space of with Jesus?
I stayed in that space until the next thing that I well let me I'll back up a little bit. So when I was so excited, I was ready to go. I mean, I could feel myself trying to get up. I mean, I was literally just trying to fight and get up because I wanted to go. And
Mm.
it hit me, and I'm going to pause my story here just for a second because it just so happened that probably about a month or so before, me and my wife had actually talked about near-death experiences because we were going to have Jesse Duplantis at our church for a guest to talk. And I don't know if you've heard his story, but he
Yes.
took a trip to heaven. And I told Beth, I said, wouldn't that be cool? I was like, that'd be really neat. So you really got to watch what you pray for because I forgot to pray that I wouldn't die during this. I just like to see what it was like. So, and I told her, I said, I would hope that if that ever happened to me, that I would be able to still stop and say, whatever your will is what I want. And that's what happened. I mean, out of all that excitement, I mean, literally, I was just jumping. I was doing everything I could to get up and I even told Jesus. I told our pastor this, and I don't mean it in disrespect, but I was so excited. I was like, all right, open her up. Let me see what you got. I mean, that's literally word for word what I said. And
I love that. You had noted that before, and you meant no disrespect by that, but you were kind of like a giddy child at this point, weren't you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I just took a second. Of course, I don't know how long seconds are because it's like time is different when you're there versus here. Um, but I did get a hold of myself and I stopped and I told him, I told Jesus, I said, I am more than willing and ready to come up. I am ready to go. But I said, I will do, if you want me to stay, I will stay. I said, but the only thing I told him, I said, I don't know how much more of the pain that I can take. And that's when I remember uh, getting pushed out of a room, going to surgery.
Mm. So, Beth, over to you now at this point. So, you had mentioned that the staff there said we don't have a surgeon, I guess, on call or there in the hospital to perform this procedure. You were obviously not in surgery, not allowed in surgery, but you were seeing Martin as he was pale. His heart was not pumping blood to these parts or extremities of his body, hence the paleness or the blueness or grayness. So, what were you told as his prognosis at that point, Beth? He's at the point where some of the staff, I would imagine, were thinking, we're going to lose him.
Right. They didn't say too much to me. They said that they were going to take him from the hospital room that he was admitted into. They were taking him over to ICU to work on him. So, okay. So they asked me to wait in a waiting room until they came and got me. And I was there, and I checked the time. It was about 10 o'clock when they took him out, and it was a little after 11 when they took him down into surgery. While they had him in ICU, I don't know what they did, but after a while, 45, 50 minutes, they came and got me, and he had a little bit of color to his face. I thought, okay, so there's something. Thank you, Lord. And he was cognizant enough to say he loved me, and he knew he was going into surgery, and that's when they wheeled him out of that room. So the time in the waiting room, the time where they were working on him in the room and until they took him out to ICU, I was a mess. I would like to say that I handled it better, but I was a mess. I knew what I was seeing. I knew what he would be going to. I didn't know what he was experiencing, but I wasn't ready to lose him. So a lot of my prayer was that God would preserve his life. I know that was probably selfish on my part, but it was what it was. I knew he would do what his goodwill is, and he had to make the call. But I was very much a mess for that hour. When they had him in surgery, they had him there for about an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes. So it was close to 1 a.m. when they were finally done.
Now, this joy, unfettered joy, Martin, that you felt being in the presence of Jesus, and you were speaking to Jesus. Was there any impartation from Jesus to you, from the Lord to you at that point, or were you just enveloped in this pure joy, the joy of the Lord? Tell us about that. What your communion was with Jesus at this point.
Well, the light is really, really all I've seen. I expected the next thing for me was to get up and go. That's what I was expecting. But I just kept praying to him, and like I said, I was just ecstatic. I didn't hear him actually say anything, but it's just a thing that when he's there. And I know the light was real on what I seen because, well, for one thing, I mentioned the can lighting in the ceiling. When that light, when God's light started shining through, one thing I noticed, I couldn't no longer distinguish the ceiling tile framework. You know how ceiling tile sits down into like a white framework. I don't remember seeing that at all. And the other thing was I looked at the chrome ring in the ceiling, and the ring had turned black instead of a reflection, because normally you could see reflections of people going, just the way they're walking around and stuff. This ring had turned black, which in my mind is like if somebody takes a photograph of somebody with the sun behind them, their front turns black because the light behind them is brighter. So that light was definitely there.
I like how you explain it, because you are an engineer, a very successful engineer, and Martin, you're seeing things in the detail way of thinking that an engineer would process information and analytics and measurements and designs and so forth. So most engineers I know are very practically minded, not what we would say more fanciful kind of thinkers like poets might be. But you were, this is not your first miracle that you experienced. So it seemed like, the Lord had brought you to this place when you were, had this near-death experience, but you were not, kind of a novice at the miraculous, were you?
No, I've seen God work several times in my life. I've seen it with my mother. I've seen it with my sister. My mother, she had a stroke in her cerebrum, which, from what I understand, is a pretty bad area to have a stroke in the brain. Not only that, when she had the stroke, she lost her balance and fell backwards onto the driveway and had a brain bleed. So at the time, my parents lived in West Virginia and I'm in Texas. So I can't remember exactly who called or how I found out that she was in the hospital. Kim, my sister called me. So, and that's another miracle with my sister. So I went to West Virginia. When I got there, they had her hooked up with all tubes and intensive care. She was in bad shape. She was not responding to nobody. The nurses couldn't get her to respond. They couldn't get her blood pressure under control. They were, because when you have a bleed of some sort, it's really, from what I understand, it's really imperative that you keep the blood pressure down to try to get the bleeding to stop. And they couldn't do that. And my mom's suffered with blood pressure problems on and off through her life, but this was like off the scale. They were giving her all the medicines that they needed to give her, and they just couldn't keep it. They couldn't keep it down. So I had my Bible, and I just sat beside her bed and just started praying. It was in the evening. I prayed literally all night. Of course, the nurse would come in and check her to see, if anything had changed. And the machine was set up to take her blood pressure every 10 minutes or so. So it got to around, I don't know, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And, I was praying out of my own wants. I was not ready to let her go. I have two really good Christian parents, and I'm adopted, so I was really blessed to be able to be part of their life, and I just was not ready to let her go. So I changed my prayer from God save her, please, because I don't want to lose her, to save her for your good and for your glory, because in today's day, it's really hard to find. It's getting more and more hard to find good Christian examples of marriage relationships. And as far as I'm concerned, they were a prime example. And immediately, as soon as I prayed that prayer, the next time that the machine took her blood pressure was normal. So I looked at the machine. I was like, well, we'll wait and see what happens next time. We'll give it another 10 minutes. So I just kept praying and praying, praying. Same thing. Next time the machine kicked on, normal blood pressure. So I went outside and got the nurse and brought her back inside. And she looked up at the blood pressure and she basically did the same thing I did. It was like, huh. So she walked over to mom and tapped her on the shoulder and woke her up and started talking to her. Mom was joking around with her and the nurse came over and she said, I've never seen this before. So I told her, I said, you've just seen a miracle. And she said, well, she didn't deny it or anything, but she said, well, they had scheduled mom another scan at 6 a.m. She'd already had 2 scans of her brain, and both of them showed internal hemorrhaging, bleeding bad, and pressure building up on her brain. So the nurse told me, well, this next scan, that's at 6 a.m. She said, this next scan, don't be surprised if it comes back bad, but the following scan after that coming back good. And I said, no, I said, this next scan is going to come back good. So she walked out of the room and I started praying again. And I prayed continuously until they came and took mom. And by that time I was exhausted. And, they took mom out of the room. I told God, I said, you're going to have to take over from her because I don't know what else to do. So I ended up falling asleep. The next thing I know, they're bringing mom back into the room. The nurse taps me on the shoulder and wakes me up. And she said, scan was good. So the bleeding and everything had stopped and it was normal.
Wow.
And it took her a while to recover, but she did recover.
Well, God has had his hand on you, your mother, and Beth. Did you pray something similar when Martin was in surgery? And how did you pray for him? What was your prayer like?
I was conflicted. I knew that God would do his perfect will. Whatever his will was, it would be perfect. And I prayed that would be that I could keep him, that he would preserve Martin's life. But I understood that it was entirely within God's will. So while he was in surgery, I prayed for the surgeons to have wisdom and God to guide their hands and to protect him and to protect him from any ill effects from any of this, because I knew he had been losing blood this entire time. And I knew that there were other risks and things that could happen. So I was praying for his protection, and maybe not very elegantly or maybe not very intelligently, but just truthfully.
Prayer in the time of crisis is something that really kind of puts us in a situation where it's not necessarily the Lord's Prayer, but although we can pray that, the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But we're at the point of kind of being made raw, that, the emotions are raw. The prayer is just, God, take over. I don't sometimes know how to pray. I don't know what to pray for. Tell me what to pray for. And you've talked about, both of you, about how to pray, or what to pray. And I pray more of the kind of what I would consider the selfish leaning prayer of, God, save my loved one. Or do I pray something like, Lord, I want you to be glorified through this situation. And so both of you, each of you respectively, now for your part, Beth, praying for Martin, and Martin, you're praying for your mother, are praying that kind of the latter prayer of, God, I want you to do what would glorify you best for what you would will in this situation. Give me wisdom in how to pray. Now, Martin, in your case, however, you're not necessarily praying at this point, Lord, save me. You're like a kid in a candy store. in
Oh
heaven.
yeah.
I mean, you're having a grand old time there. So, did you want to come back? Did you feel like, when did you know that this was not your time?
I think originally, Beth had a little bit of a problem with that, but no, I didn't want to come back. And it's not that I didn't care about my loved ones, because I've got Beth, I've got my parents, I've got two kids. It's not that I wanted to leave them. It's just I knew that's what was right. And like I said, your mindset is it's a whole different mindset, and it's very difficult to describe because here we think we've got all these questions we're going to ask, and I want to know this and that. But when you're there, it's like those don't even phase in. It's just like everything's going to be okay.
You were in perfect peace.
Oh yeah.
And did you have any direction as to what you should be praying for, or what you should be doing? Did the Lord give you any sense that He would be returning you to this earth?
Other than just when I stopped and asked Him for His will to be done, um, that kind of surprises me even now, because I really wanted to go bad. And I told Beth, I said, we were the other day, of course, allergies are bad here. So the other day we weren't feeling too good. I told her, I jokingly, I was like, but kind of serious too. I was like, well, I really wished I felt like I did when I was dying.
Well, Beth, don't take offense to that, because our loved ones sometimes think, well, how can that be? Don't you love me? I mean, you wanted to stay, but I would say that almost invariably, with the people with whom we have spoken, that they want to stay because they know that God is going to take care of their loved ones, and there's this all-consuming belief that God is in control, and He's going to fashion a way that is best overall. But probably wasn't necessarily what you would desire at that point, because you're stuck in this world. You're not having that kind of because yours is one of angst, one of concern, and perhaps worry, certainly, Beth, that he might not return. So when the doctors came out of surgery, the doctor comes out, speaks to the loved one, and so what did the doctor say out of surgery?
The doctor and the nurse both came out and they said everything looked good. They said that it went well. It looked like they got the bleeding stopped. They would monitor to make sure, but the doctor said everything looked good. And I I feel a little guilt because I didn't just glorify God, but I was kind of frozen. So all I could squeak out was thank you.
Hmm.
And that was about the end of it.
Yeah. Well, you're probably in some state of shock through all of this and going through this. Now, Martin, when you came back, how did you come back from this experience, being in the glorified presence of the Lord?
And I kind of shell shocked since I was getting wheeled into surgery and I stayed awake for the whole surgery. So it was kind of, yeah. It's one of those things where you really want to be there. But so I'll come back to that here in just a second if that's okay. So I went to the
Yes.
surgery, and they went in and put the quills in, came back to the room, and I started telling Beth about everything that I'd went through. Um, but at a point later on, I wondered, why wasn't I allowed to see more? I really wanted to see. I'd like to see more while I was there, and what kind of hit me and come to me was, I've seen. I know you've had Dean. I think it's Dean Braxton on
Yes.
your program,
Hmm.
and and others that have been there, and it's a real change from what they've seen to come back to here. And sometimes it affects your personal life as well, because I don't know if it's depression or what, but I think that if I'd have seen much more, that I would have really been in much worse shape emotionally because just of missing that. And I with all of our responsibilities, that would not have been good, because my sister's got muscular dystrophy. I've got, my parents are elderly. And to add that into the mix would just be would be crippling for me, because just to deal with that would be an emotional, that'd be a real emotional, I don't know, challenge. So
And you were very happy after telling people the story and witnessing to people. He was very happy in the days and the weeks after, as he kept telling people about what had happened.
Interesting.
Like
I'm sorry.
That's right. It's just like the longer away that you get from when that happened, it's like the more you really want to go back to that, to what you had.
Yeah. I empathize. I had a period of malaise, if not outright depression, when I returned, missing, being in the presence of Jesus. And Dean is a friend of mine. We've talked about that, about our experiences as I speak with everyone that, of course, and have become friends with most of the people with whom I've had the pleasure of interviewing. And these experiences are unique to the person having had them. But there is a shared experience from a different perspective, as with you, Beth, when you were going through this with Martin, and you said, well, you had joy and it's kind of a conundrum, I guess, in a way, because yes, Martin was expressing and he was sharing the Lord, sharing the joy of the Lord and his experience, perhaps with others. But at the same time, you were seeing this. Maybe, Martin, you were sharing, or you were thinking, I'm back. I'm back in this place. Here I was in the highest mountain, the top of the mountain, and now I'm back in this pit, if you will. This world is false, but I'll just ask both of you, coming back from this experience, what you would say was perhaps the biggest takeaway from all of this. So first, if I can start with you, Martin, and then I'll ask you, Beth, as to what your greatest takeaway from this was.
The biggest takeaway would be that if you're not saved, you better accept Jesus as your Savior, because that's the only way you're going to get there. If you die saved and you're watching a loved one, or you're watching a loved one pass away, you can be assured that when they're crossing over, they are not worried about this place at all. They are having the time of their life. I'm telling you, I've never been happier, more excited. It's just crazy. It's the best of the best, and there's no other real way to describe it until you experience it for yourself.
And I can see why, you had mentioned that if you had stayed longer and seen more, then you might have had this regret, even greater regret, that you were back in the world and you had missed all of the, already missed it. You said you missed this experience and no longer, but I found that interesting in what you just said, Martin, and that if you'd stayed longer, it would be, even greater, this sense of loss, or a sense of, I don't know what you would call it, maybe wanting to go back. Beth, back to you. What was your key takeaway from this?
As as he shared what he was experiencing, it put my experience into perspective. It was absolutely horrible what I was saying, but he was excited. He was thrilled. He was ready. And when the scripture says that no eye has seen, no ear has heard what God has prepared for those who love him, I can't imagine what heaven is like. And I think that I get choked up about it just because of how powerful his experience was. But when he said that he felt like he belonged there, I can only imagine the goodness that God has for us, waiting for us.
Mm, so well said. And it takes both perspectives, doesn't it? Because, the having been to the top of the mountain, so to speak, and having seen someone who has been to the top of the mountain share that with a loved one in a way that probably is somewhat indescribable. And yet I can tell, Beth, from what you just shared, that there's a vicarious impartation of Martin's experience to you, even in his sharing it with you, because you went through this crisis. So, Martin, tell us as we kind of wrap things up before we go to one of my most enjoyable parts of a program, which is praying for people. Tell us what you would say to somebody now going through suffering, pain, as you were at that time, on the other side of heaven. What would you say to that person?
So the other side of heaven, are you meaning like back here?
Yes. How would any advice coming from the perspective of where you were, being in the presence of Jesus? Any advice to those who are going through pain, because you were on the flip side, diametrically opposed places, heaven versus this world? Any advice that you might give people?
All I know is that Jesus is there, and you pray to him, and he will be there. He will deliver you one way or the other. And if it's the other, in other words, going on to heaven, I'm telling you, that's the best. That's the best thing that you could. That's the best thing that you can possibly want. I mean, it's just fantastic. It's just crazy.
Coming from somebody who's been there, and so you mentioned a few times now. You need to have Jesus as your Lord and Savior to get there.
Yes.
That's excuse my crude terminology, but the gold ticket. I mean, it really is. You got to have that. And if you don't have it, you can't go there. It's just plain and simple. When Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but through me," he was exclusive. No roads, not all roads get you there. Only one way. He was the exclusive way to heaven. No one comes to the Father but through Jesus. Jesus said that through him. So would you be kind enough to pray a prayer of salvation? And for those who are watching this, before you tune off, there's you may already have that relationship with Jesus as your Lord and Savior, but we want you to pray this as well, because there's a refreshment. Doesn't mean that you need to get saved again. No, not once saved. If you're saved, then you're saved. But when you pray this again, it kind of is a refreshing to the soul as you go through. It's a confession. It's as a request for God to take control, for Jesus to take the lordship over. Sometimes we kind of get weakened by the world. We get far apart from our first love. So will you be kind enough to pray? with people so that those who don't know Jesus as Lord and Savior would know him? And also any other prayers that you might pray for our audience today?
Sure thing. And, Jesus, with what he did on the cross for us, he made it simple for us to be saved. Very simple. So we'll just go ahead and say a prayer here. Dear God, we come to you. We thank you for this opportunity to share our testimony. We thank you for the audience and everybody that's watching. Master God, if anybody is watching that's unsaved, ask them now that they would just pray this prayer. Dear Jesus, I ask you to forgive me of my sins. I know that you died on the cross to save me and that you are the only way to heaven. I ask you, dear Jesus, to come into my life, forgive me of my sins, be my Lord, and I will trust in you that what you did on the cross is what I need to get to heaven. We thank you for everything. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. We also pray for you if you're going through suffering or pain. We pray that the Lord's touch upon you right now, that his comforting, healing touch would come into you. Martin was suffering from something that should have caused him death and a lifetime, an eternity in heaven. But he's with us. Some are with Jesus now in heaven. Maybe you have a loved one and there's that pain of loss. So we pray in the mighty name of Jesus, there would be a comfort upon you and a healing touch, whether it be healing from sorrow or mourning or healing from sickness, that the Lord Jesus would just reach in and heal whatever pain or suffering that you might have. So I want to say to you, Beth and Martin, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. You've been a great blessing to us.
Thank you, Randy, for having us and letting us get our testimony out.
Thank you.
Well, we have some great news to share in parting, and that is if you are indeed in Christ Jesus, be of good cheer, because heaven is in your future. Take care, and God bless. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe. And if you'd like further information, go to our website at randyk.org, where our mission is simple: to share the great news of God's love.